The grammar has been corrected, and the numbers have been converted into words. Meet the family embarrassment, my brother Tyler told his groomsmen, his voice carrying clearly across the impeccably manicured lawn of the breakers. She works in sanitation, you know, trash. They all laughed, the sound sharp and ugly against the backdrop of the crashing Atlantic waves. I just smiled, adjusted my clutch, and walked away. Then, a shadow fell over me. The best man approached, looking less like a wedding guest and more like a federal agent. "Miss Anderson?" he said, his voice low and serious. "I'm Alexander, your new head of security. Shall we leave? Before we dive into the rest of this mess, I have to know. What is the single most ridiculous rule a family member has ever tried to enforce on you at a wedding? Drop it in the comments, I'm reading all of them. This wasn't supposed to happen. Or maybe, in my family, it was inevitable." The morning had started with a phone call that set the tone for the entire day. My mother, Angela, didn't call to ask how my flight was or if I needed anything. She called to inspect me from afar. "Jasmine," she said, skipping any greeting. "Please tell me you brought the dress I selected." "The beige one?" I asked, looking at the shapeless garment hanging on the back of my hotel room door. It looked like something you'd wear to paint a house, not attend a black tie wedding at a Newport mansion. "Yes, the beige one. It's neutral, unobtrusive. We don't want you looking like, well, like you smell of refuse." Refuse. That was her polite word for it. "I'll wear it, Mother," I said, my voice flat. "Good. And please, try to stay in the background today. Ashley's family is very particular. We don't want any awkward conversations about your job." My job. To them, I was a janitor, a garbage sorter, someone who spent her days knee-deep in other people's waste. They had constructed this reality 5 years ago when I mentioned I was working in environmental waste management, and they had never bothered to ask a follow-up question. I zipped up the beige dress. It hung on me like a sack, erasing my figure, my presence, my confidence. It was designed to make me invisible. I stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't a janitor. She was the founder and CEO of EcoCore, an $8.5 billion green tech giant. I handled waste-to-energy conversion for the Pentagon. I consulted for the G7. My company was literally turning the world's trash into the power that ran cities. But to my family, I was just Jasmine, the failure. Why did I let them believe it? That's the question everyone asks. Why endure the insults, the pity, the separate table at Thanksgiving? Because it was a test. A long, painful, silent test. I wanted to know if they could love me without the title. Without the money. Without the prestige. I wanted to know if I was enough, just as Jasmine. Standing there in that hotel room, watching the fabric pool around my ankles, I finally accepted the answer. They couldn't. Working with waste teaches you something profound about value. You learn that what society discards, what it labels as useless or dirty, often holds the most potential energy. You learn that value isn't about what something looks like on the surface, it's about what it can become. I had built an empire on that principle. I had taken the things no one wanted and turned them into the thing everyone needed. But my family? They only saw the surface. They saw the beige dress. They saw the trash job. They couldn't see the power plant humming beneath the surface. I checked my reflection one last time. No jewelry, minimal makeup, just as ordered. The invisible armor of the survivor isn't made of steel, it's made of silence. It's made of knowing who you are, when everyone else has decided you are nothing. I grabbed my purse. It was time to go to a wedding. It was time to play the part one last time. Because today, the test was over. And I already knew the grade. I walked out of the hotel room, leaving the old Jasmine behind in the mirror. The woman walking into the breakers wasn't looking for approval anymore. She was looking for an exit. And she was about to make one hell of a departure. The air in the cocktail lounge was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and old money. I walked into the room, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the social climate. This is what toxic family dynamics look like when they have a budget. They don't scream at you. They don't make a scene. They weaponize concern. They wrap their insults in soft voices and worried glances until you feel like you're the one who's crazy. I watched my mother, Angela, moving through the crowd like a shark in silk. She was whispering to a group of Ashley's relatives, her hand fluttering near her chest in a gesture of maternal distress. As I approached the buffet, a woman I didn't know, one of Ashley's aunts, judging by the pearls, turned to me. She smiled, but her eyes were darting around my hands, my arms, as if looking for a rash. "You must be Jasmine," she said, taking a subtle step back. "Angela told us all about your work. It's so brave of you." "Brave?" I asked, reaching for a glass of water. The woman flinched when my hand moved near hers. "Well, you know, the sanitation industry, dealing with all that filth. I don't know how you manage the hygiene of it all. I'd be scrubbing my skin raw every night." I paused, my glass halfway to my mouth. It wasn't just ignorance, it was a campaign. My mother and Ashley hadn't just told people I worked in waste management, they had painted a picture of me as a walking biohazard. They had turned my career into a contagion. "I manage," I said coolly. "Soap is a wondrous invention." She gave a tight, nervous laugh and hurried away. I stood alone near a marble pillar, watching the room. I saw Tyler, my brother, laughing with his investment banker friends. He looked perfect in his tuxedo, the golden boy of Wall Street. He pointed me out to a groomsman, whispered something, and then made a show of wiping his hands on a napkin. They were laughing. They needed this. I realized it with sudden clarity. They needed me to be the dirty, shameful secret so they could feel pristine. My failure was the foundation their egos stood on. If I wasn't the trash queen, who were they? I didn't shrink. I didn't hide in the bathroom. I stood there in my beige dress and let them whisper. Because I knew something they didn't. I knew that the air conditioning cooling their skin was running on a grid my team designed. I knew the compostable napkins Tyler was using were manufactured in one of my facilities. I was in every corner of this room, invisible and essential. Dinner was served in the Great Hall. The ceilings were 40 feet high, painted with cherubs that looked down on us with indifference. I was seated at table 19. The overflow table. I sat next to a distant cousin who was currently between rehab stints and the wedding planner's assistant. Then came the toasts. Tyler stood up, tapping a knife against his crystal champagne flute. The room hushed. He had that easy, practiced charm of a man who has never been told no. "Profound gratitude," he was saying. "To the titans of industry in this room. To Ashley's father. For building a legacy. To my mentors at Goldman. For teaching me the value of capital." He raised his glass, his smile tight and bright. "We are surrounded by excellence tonight. By people who move markets. By people who build empires." He paused, and his eyes scanned the room until they landed on me. Table 19. The beige dress. "And," he continued, his voice dropping to a register of performative humility. "To my sister, Jasmine." Every head turned. The spotlight felt heavy. Physical. "Jasmine reminds us of something important," Tyler said. "While we are up here reaching for the stars, someone has to keep their feet on the ground. Someone has to do the dirty work. The unglamorous work. The work that, frankly, smells a bit." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Nervous, cruel laughter. "To Jasmine," he finished, raising his glass higher. "For handling the trash so the rest of us can shine." The humiliation was absolute. It wasn't a toast. It was an eviction notice from the family's respect. He had just publicly designated me as the service staff to his success. My mother dabbed her eyes, looking tragic and noble, as if tolerating my existence was her greatest charity work. I stared at Tyler. I didn't blink. I didn't look down. I etched his face into my memory, the smugness, the arrogance, the total lack of fear. He thought I was helpless. That was when I felt it. A sharp, insistent vibration against my hip. I looked down at my clutch. The screen was lit up. Caller ID, Alexander, head of security message, code red. Assets in place. E to 2 minutes. I picked up the phone. The time for silence was over. The first sign wasn't the sound. It was the champagne in Tyler's glass. As he stood there, basking in the afterglow of his little comedy routine, The liquid inside the crystal flute began to tremble. Ripples formed on the surface, concentric circles of disturbance that had nothing to do with his shaky moral compass. Then came the sound. A low, rhythmic thumping that vibrated in the chest. Thump, thump, thump. It grew louder, faster, heavier, until it wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force pressing down on the manicured lawn. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure. The cellist looked up, eyes wide, as a shadow eclipsed the sun. "What the hell is that?" Tyler shouted, looking at the sky. The wind hit us a second later. It wasn't a gentle breeze. It was rotor wash, a hurricane of downdraft generated by a twin-engine Sikorsky S-76 commercial helicopter. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for Ashley's perfect aesthetic. The linen tablecloths whipped violently, sending silverware clattering to the ground. The elaborate floral centerpieces, which had probably cost more than my first car, toppled over. Guests shrieked, clutching their hats and hair extensions as the gale-force winds turned the garden party into a disaster zone. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there in my beige dress, watching the black beast descend. It landed right on the south lawn, its skids crushing the prize-winning hydrangeas. The engines didn't shut down, they just idled, a screaming whine of turbine power that made conversation impossible. The side door slid open. Alexander stepped out. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a tactical suit that cost more than Tyler's entire portfolio. He moved with the terrifying precision of a man who clears rooms for a living. Flanked by two security operatives who looked like they ate concrete for breakfast, he strode across the grass. Tyler, recovering from his shock, puffed up his chest. He marched toward Alexander, the lord of the manor defending his territory. "Hey!" Tyler yelled over the roar of the rotors. "You can't land that thing here. This is a private event. I'll have you arrested for—" Alexander didn't even look at him. He didn't break stride. He walked past the groom, past the bride, past my mother who was clutching her pearls like they were oxygen. He walked straight to me. He stopped 3 feet away, snapped his heels together, and gave a sharp, respectful nod. "Madam CEO," he said. His voice was calm, clipped, and projected clearly over the noise. "We have a situation." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Report," I said. My voice wasn't the voice of the sister who fetched the coffee, it was the voice that commanded boardrooms in Tokyo and Berlin. Alexander handed me a tablet. The G7 Energy Summit moved the timetable up. The Pentagon has greenlit the contract. We need to close the merger within the hour. He paused, looking around the stunned circle of faces, before locking eyes with me again. "The deal is valued at $3.6 billion, ma'am. They require your biometrics to authorize the grid integration. We have 18 minutes before the window closes." I looked at the tablet. The numbers were scrolling in real time, red and green lines of data representing enough power to light up the eastern seaboard. 3.6 billion, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. "That's unfortunate timing. We have the bird fueled and ready for extraction to the Manhattan headquarters," Alexander said. "Your team is on standby." I looked up from the screen. My mother was staring at Alexander, then at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. Ashley looked like she was trying to calculate if she could sue a helicopter. But Tyler looked like he was seeing a ghost. "CEO?" he whispered, the words strangling him. What merger?" I handed the tablet back to Alexander. "The one that pays for your electricity, Tyler," I said. "Prepare for departure." "You can't just leave," my mother said, stepping in front of me. Her voice was high and brittle, the sound of a woman watching her social standing evaporate in real time. "We have guests, Jasmine. You are making a scene." "I'm not making a scene, Angela," I said, dropping the title, Mother. "I'm making a business decision." "Business?" she scoffed, though her eyes kept darting to the helicopter behind me. "You sort trash. Do not pretend this. This theatrics changes who you are." I looked up at the ceiling of the tent, at the thousands of tiny fairy lights, and the massive crystal chandeliers that were currently blazing electricity. "Alexander," I said calmly. "What is the power load for this venue right now?" Alexander tapped his tablet. Operating at 94% capacity on the microgrid, ma'am. If we initiate the remote diagnostic cycle, the breakers will trip in 3 seconds. I looked back at my mother. You see, the breakers is a historic property. It requires a specialized, sustainable energy grid to function without blowing the local transformers. My company, EcoCore, designed that grid. We installed it. We own the proprietary software that keeps your champagne cold and your lights on. I took a step closer to her. I suggest you move out of my way. I haven't authorized the evening power cycle yet, and I'd hate for Ashley's perfect reception to go dark. My mother froze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. I wasn't just rich. I was the infrastructure. I was the environment she existed in. But we weren't done. Alexander cleared his throat. Madam CEO, before we depart, there is the matter of the groom's portfolio. Tyler flinched. We don't need to discuss business here, he said, his voice cracking. This is a wedding. It's a crime scene, Alexander corrected. He turned the tablet screen toward the guests, specifically toward the table where Tyler's bosses from Goldman were sitting. We ran a standard background check when you attempted to use Miss Anderson's name to secure a line of credit last week, Alexander said. It appears, Tyler, that you have been selling futures in a green tech partnership. You've collected roughly $4 million from investors, many in this room, by claiming you are a silent partner in EcoCore. A gasp went through the room. Not a polite gasp. A horrified one. You told them your sister was just a figurehead, Alexander continued, reading from the dossier. That you were the brains. That the trash girl was just a tax write-off. I looked at my brother. He was shaking. Suddenly, the last 10 years made sense. The constant belittling, the public humiliation, the need to paint me as incompetent, as dirty, as lesser. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a survival strategy. This is the narcissistic injury. They couldn't afford to see my success because acknowledging my power would have destroyed their own hierarchy. They needed a loser. They needed a scapegoat to stand on so they could feel tall. If I wasn't the failure, then Tyler wasn't the golden boy. He was just a fraud in a rented tuxedo. They didn't misunderstand me. They curated me. They built a cage of low expectations and forced me to live in it because my freedom was a threat to their egos. It's a Ponzi scheme, I said, my voice clinical. And you just ran out of new investors. The silence on the lawn was absolute. The wind from the rotors had died down to a low hum, waiting. Tyler looked at his bride. Ashley was backing away from him, her eyes wide, doing the math on her future. He looked at his bosses. They were already on their phones, likely calling legal. Then, he looked at me. And he broke. Jasmine, he pleaded, stepping forward, his hands out. Jasmine, please, we can fix this. Just tell them we're negotiating. Tell them I'm an advisor, please. I'm your brother. My mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate, clawing. You can't do this to him. He's family. We're family. You have billions, Jasmine. You can make this go away. Just write a check, please. They were begging. The people who had spent a decade treating me like a contagion were now looking at me like I was the cure. I looked down at my mother's hand on my arm. The same hand that had waved me away when I tried to show her my first business plan. The same hand that had chosen the beige dress. I don't write checks for bad investments, I said. I pulled my arm free. And I don't partner with liabilities. Jasmine! Tyler screamed, tears actually running down his face now. You can't leave me here. I'll go to jail. I signaled the pilot. The engine whine began to climb again, the wind picking up, whipping my hair, whipping the beige dress. I handle waste management, Tyler, I shouted over the roar. I looked at him one last time. And I think I'm done taking out the trash. I turned my back on them. I walked to the helicopter. Alexander helped me up. And for the first time all day, I didn't feel heavy. I felt weightless. The liftoff was smooth. The ground fell away instantly. I watched through the window as the breakers shrank. It looked like a dollhouse. The people looked like ants. My mother, my brother, the judges, the bankers from 500 feet up, they were all just static. Small. So incredibly small. I pulled off the headset for a moment. The cabin was quiet, insulated, a sanctuary of leather and steel. I stood up. It was tight, but I had enough room. I unzipped the beige dress. I let it fall to the floor of the helicopter. Underneath, I was wearing a black silk slip. I opened the garment bag hanging in the back. I pulled out my suit. Charcoal gray. Tailored in Milan. The armor of the woman I actually was. I dressed as we banked over the ocean, the lights of the coastline glittering below us. I put on my headset. Estimated time of arrival to Manhattan? I asked. 40 minutes, Madam CEO, the pilot responded. The board is ready for you. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. No more beige, no more apologies. To everyone who is currently being underestimated. To everyone who is sitting at the kids' table, or wearing the ugly uniform, or letting them think you're stupid because it's safer than being threatening, let them sleep on you. Let them build their entire reality around the idea that you are small. Let them get comfortable in their arrogance. Because when you finally decide to wake them up, when you finally drop the act and show them the empire you've been building in the dark, the shock on their faces will be worth every single second of silence. It makes the wake-up call that much louder. Alexander? I said. Yes, ma'am? Authorize the grid power cycle for Newport. Copy that. I watched the coastline below. A second later, the lights of the breakers blinked out, plunging the wedding into darkness. I smiled.